Hello, everyone. Forget the glossy paintings, the heroic statues, forget the grade school textbooks that whispered tales of brave explorers and noble queens, because today we're tearing down the gilded facade of history to reveal a truth far more unsettling, far more human. We're talking about the age of exploration, not as a chapter of triumph, but as a blood-soaked gamble where the stakes weren't just gold and glory, but the very soul of a continent, and the destiny of a kingdom hung by a thread thinner than a spider's silk. At the heart of this storm, two figures stood, their fates inextricably linked by a pact that would redraw the map of the world and unleash an era of unparalleled wonder and horror. One, a queen fierce and devout, her treasury emptied by decades of war. The other, an outsider, a dreamer, perhaps a madman, armed with nothing but a map, a vision, and a burnt. Their meeting wasn't predestined. It was born of desperation, a last-ditch effort to stave off ruin. Today, we ask, was Queen Isabella's funding of Christopher Columbus her greatest investment, or the bloodiest gamble in human history? Picture this. It's the late 15th century. Spain, having just purged the last vestiges of Moorish rule from Granada, should be basking in glory, but the coffers of Castile were not merely depleted. They were bone dry. The Reconquista, a centuries-long holy war, had bled the kingdom white. Isabella, a queen whose will was as unyielding as iron, found herself staring into an abyss of national debt and economic uncertainty. Her rival, Portugal, was already carving out a lucrative sea route around Africa. Spain was falling behind, a once proud nation teetering on the precipice of irrelevance. Every morning Isabella would rise, the weight of her kingdom a physical burden on her slender shoulders. The whispers of court, the hungry glances from rival powers, the sheer scale of the nation's financial woes, they gnawed at her. She needed a miracle. She needed a source of wealth so immense, so unprecedented, that it would not only refill her treasury, but launch Spain into an unassailable position among the great powers of Europe. But miracles, as we know, rarely arrive on a silver platter. Enter our second player. Christopher Columbus, a man we know as Christopher Columbus. But forget the sanitized version. This was a man of shadowy origins, a Genoese weaver's son turned sailor, whose ambition burned with an almost messianic zeal. He was consumed by a singular, audacious idea that the earth was smaller than universally believed, and that a westward journey across the treacherous Atlantic would lead directly to the opulent spice markets of Asia Cathay and Cipangu, as Marco Polo had described them. He was a man possessed, his eyes alight with a fervor that bordered on madness. For years he hawked his preposterous vision across the courts of Europe. Portugal, with its seasoned navigators, scoffed at his flawed calculations, his understated estimates of the ocean's vastness. England, France, all dismissed him as a charlatan, a fool blinded by fantasy. Imagine the humiliation, the endless rejections, the doors slammed in his face. Yet Columbus persisted, a relentless, almost ghostly figure, his conviction unwavering even as despair gnawed at his heels. He carried maps, scribbled notes, and a self-belief so profound. It bordered on delusion. He saw himself as God's chosen instrument, destined to open a new path to the east, to bring forth untold riches, and perhaps even to fund a new crusade to reclaim Jerusalem. Was it genius, or was it the fever dream of a desperate man clinging to a lifeline? The line in those days was often blurred. His final hope, his absolute last resort, was Spain. For 6 long years, Columbus languished in the Spanish court, a persistent, irritating presence. His demands were exorbitant: admiral of the ocean sea, viceroy, and governor of any lands discovered, a full tenth of all riches to the Queen's advisers. These were the outrageous demands of a madman. They were learned men, astronomers, theologians. They knew the earth was round. Yes, but they also knew it was far, far larger than Columbus claimed. His proposed voyage was not merely risky. It was, by all scientific and theological understanding of the time, suicidal. They dismissed him repeatedly. An impossibility, they cried. A fantasy woven from it, but Isabella, ever the pragmatist, could not entirely shake off the thought. Her kingdom was faltering. Desperate times, as they say, call for desperate measures. She listened, though her advisers pleaded with her to banish him. What if, just what if, this outlandish Genoese was right? What if he held the key to Spain's salvation? The court became a stage for a grand, silent drama. Columbus, a gaunt figure, would pace the halls, his eyes constantly searching for a sympathetic ear, a flicker of hope. Isabella, cloistered in her chambers, wrestled with the conflicting advice. The risk was monumental, the potential reward cataclysmic. To say no would be prudent, safe. To say yes, well, that would be to gamble everything. The turning point came as it of Columbus, utterly dejected after a final rejection, was already riding away from court, planning to offer his services to France. But then a few loyal advocates, men like Louis de Saint-Fagel, Isabella's royal treasurer, and the Franciscan friar Juan P. Fezes, intervened. Saint-Fagel, a shrewd financier, painted a vivid picture for the Queen, a bankrupt Spain, overshadowed by Portugal, its glory fading. He argued not just for the potential riches, but for the prestige, the scientific knowledge. The sheer audacity of the venture that could cement Spain's place in history. "Your Majesty," he might have pleaded, his voice urgent, "we have spent shall we balk at a pittance that could yield 100-fold, 1,000-fold? The cost of doing nothing is far greater than the cost of this expedition." Isabella listened. She was a woman who understood the language of power and legacy. The image of a Spain languishing, a pale imitation of its rivals, must have been unbearable. It was a moment of profound internal conflict to trust her advisers. To trust Columbus, an unknown, unproven foreigner, meant a terrifying leap of faith. The legend often states that Isabella pledged her jewels to fund the voyage. A romantic notion, perhaps, but the truth was far more complex, and in many ways far more revealing of the Queen's desperate gamble. Her personal jewels were already pledged or entailed. What she did, what Saint-Fagel did on her behalf, was to secure a loan from the Santa Hermandad, a powerful national police force, and redirect funds from various royal accounts. This wasn't a sentimental gesture. It was a cold, calculated move of state finance, a reallocation of scarce resources on an almost unthinkable venture. It was an act of economic wizardry and an act of faith that placed the future of her kingdom squarely on the shoulders of one man and 3 small ships. The contract, the capitulations of Santa Fe, was signed on the 17th of April, 1492. It wasn't just a charter, it was a blood oath, a binding covenant that would forever change the course of human history. For Columbus, for Isabella, it was the ultimate throw of the dice, a moment of profound, terrifying commitment. She, a queen burdened by the past, gambled everything on a phantom future, on the possibility of a world unseen. The very air around the court seemed to thicken with unspoken questions, triumph or ruin, glory or ignominy. Little did they know, they were unleashing forces that would bring... The year 1492 wasn't just the year Spain unified, it was the year the world began to unravel and re-stitch itself in ways no one could have predicted. Imagine the scene, the 3rd of August, 1492, Palos de la Frontera. 3 small ships, the Naifea, Pinta, and Santa Marfea, bobbing impatiently in the harbor. Their sails, emblazoned with the Castilian cross, seemed impossibly fragile against the boundless expanse of the unknown ocean. On board a crew of perhaps 90 men, a motley assortment of hardened sailors, landlubbers, and even a few convicted criminals, granted clemency in exchange for daring this suicidal voyage. Fear, a cold, insidious dread, permeated the very timbers of legends of sea monsters, of the world's edge where ships plunged into oblivion, of endless, featureless waters. These were not mere fables to these men. They were very real, terrifying possibilities. Columbus, standing on the deck of the Santa Marfea, his face etched with years of struggle and the weight of his singular ambition, was a figure of both inspiration and terror. His iron will was legend. He was charting a course into utter darkness, betting his life, and the lives of every man on board on a theory few believed. Day bled into night, week into month. The familiar coast of Europe vanished, replaced by an endless horizon of blue. The days grew long, monotonous, punctuated only by the creak of timber and the distant cries of seabirds, false omens that only fueled the crew. Columbus, ever the master manipulator, kept 2 logbooks, one for his crew, showing artificially shorter distances, and one for himself, recording the true, terrifying length of their journey. He understood the fragile psychology of men pushed to their limits, understood that the very concept of such a vast, empty ocean could break their spirit. Mutiny, a constant, simmering threat. Voices, at first hushed, then bolder, questioned his sanity. His leadership, whispers of turning back, of seizing command, echoed through the cramped quarters. The sailors, hardened as they were, saw only an empty sea, an endless expanse of water that refused to yield. They were sailing not just west, but into the jaws of a prophecy, a grim foreboding of doom that clung to the air like a... Columbus, by all accounts, faced them down with a steely resolve, promising riches beyond imagination, threatening harsh punishment for insubordination. He spoke of signs, migrating birds, floating branches, anything to rekindle their dying hope. His authority was absolute, yet it was constantly challenged, tested by the growing despair of his men. The tension on those ships must have been unbearable, a taut, vibrating string stretched to its breaking point. Then, on the 12th of October, 1492, a cry ripped through the pre-dawn darkness. "Fi tierra, land!" It was a miracle. A collective gasp of relief, of disbelief swept through the ships. The long night of doubt and fear was over. The sun rose to reveal a lush, green island, bathed in the golden light of dawn, its shores teeming with a people unlike any they had ever seen. The initial wonder was palpable. These were not the fierce warriors of Cathay, nor the opulent merchants of Sepang. These were the Tafeno people, gentle, curious, adorned with gold ornaments, Columbus mistaking the islands for the outlying Indies. His journal entries from those first days glow with a sense of wonder, describing the beauty of the land, the innocence of its people. "They are so naive and so free with their possessions that no one who has not witnessed them would believe it," he wrote. "Should your majesties command it, all the inhabitants could be taken away to Castile, or held captive on their own island, for with 50 men we could subjugate them all and make them do." This single passage, written in a moment of triumph, reveals the chilling undercurrent of the entire venture. Beneath the glittering facade of discovery lay the dark heart of conquest. The search for gold, the primary driver for Isabella's gamble, began immediately. The Tafano, innocent and trusting, freely traded their small gold ornaments for trinkets. But for Columbus and his men, the obsession grew a feverish hunger that quickly overshadowed any pretense of peaceful exchange. "It appears to me," Columbus wrote, "that these people, if converted, would easily be made to work for us." Work in this context meant forced labor. Conversion meant subjugation. The first seeds of betrayal, of a devastating future, were sown in those idyllic, sun-drenched... The curse of the venture began to manifest itself not in sea monsters or falling off the world, but in the insidious greed that corrupted every interaction. Columbus established the first European settlement, La Navidad, on Hispaniola, leaving behind a small garrison of men, a testament to his ambition and a harbinger of the violence to come. When he returned to Spain in March 1493, after a tumultuous voyage home, the reception was nothing short of a Roman triumph. Cannon salutes, ringing bells, cheering crowds, Isabella and Ferdinand, draped in their royal finery, received him like a conquering hero in Barcelona. Columbus, now the admiral of the ocean sea, presented his proof: exotic birds, strange plants, a few captured Tafeno adorned with gold, and of course the gold itself, not mountains of it, but enough to tantalize, to confirm the possibility, Isabella's gamble. It seemed had paid off. Her vision, her desperate faith in this Genoese outside. Spain was no longer a struggling nation. It was poised to become an empire, a titan of the burgeoning global stage, The news electrified Europe. A new world just beyond the horizon, brimming with riches. The age of global empires had dawned. But beneath the surface of this glittering triumph, shadows already gathered. Columbus's men left at La Navidad had quickly descended into lawlessness, raping, plundering, and killing the Taino. When Columbus returned on his second, much larger expedition later that year, Fay 17 ships, 1,200 men, he found La Navidad in ashes, its garrison massacred by the enraged natives. The dream of peaceful coexistence was shattered, replaced by an escalate. This second voyage marked a dramatic shift. It was no longer a journey of discovery, but an expedition of conquest. The pursuit of gold became a frantic, brutal endeavor. The Taino were enslaved, forced to mine for gold under inhuman conditions. Those who resisted were met with overwhelming Spanish force, with steel, crossbows, and ultimately cannon fire. The idyllic islands rapidly transformed into a crucible of suffering. Columbus, a visionary navigator, proved to be an abysmal administrator. His methods were draconian, his leadership increasingly erratic. He instituted a cruel tribute system, demanding that every Taino adult hand over a certain amount of gold dust every 3 months. Failure to comply meant brutal punishment, often the severing of hands. This wasn't merely greed. It was an act of systematic dehumanization, fueled by a relentless drive to prove his worth, to deliver on the promise of riches to his queen. The indigenous population, unaccustomed to European diseases, to sustained warfare, to forced labor, began to perish in catastrophic numbers. Within decades, the Taino civilization was virtually wiped out on Hispaniola. A vibrant culture, millennia in the making, simply ceased to exist, consumed by the voracious appetite of the Old World. Isabella, back in Spain, began to receive disquieting reports, not of gold, but of cruelty, of Columbus's failures as a governor, of the enslavement of natives, of the escalating violence. Her initial joy at the discovery began to sour. She had envisioned a mission of conversion, bringing Christianity to new souls, not a campaign of annihilation. She even issued decrees attempting to protect the native populations, declaring them her subjects. But the forces unleashed were far beyond her control. The machinery of colonial exploitation, once set in motion, proved impossible to halt. Columbus, increasingly desperate to maintain his prestige and wealth, continued to push further, driven by a delusional hope of finding the true Golden Kingdom. His subsequent voyages were marked by more suffering, more failure as an administrator, and a growing sense of personal tragedy. He was eventually arrested and sent back to Spain in chains, stripped of his titles, a broken man railing. He died believing he had found a new route to Asia, utterly ignorant of the true scope of his discovery. Isabella, too, faced the grim reality of her investment. The gold, when it finally flowed, came at an unspeakable human cost. The riches fueled Spain's golden age. Yes, transforming it into the wealthiest and most powerful nation in Europe for a time. But this immense wealth was built on the curse was not a supernatural one, but a moral stain, a historical reckoning that continues to echo through the centuries. What, then, was Isabella's ultimate investment? Was it merely gold, or was it the very trajectory of modern history? The funding of Columbus was indeed a gamble, one that paid off handsomely in geopolitical power and material wealth for Spain. It opened up the Americas, ushering in an era of unprecedented global exchange, the mingling of cultures, ideas, and goods, what historians call the Columbian Exchange. But this exchange was not equal. It brought devastating diseases to the New World, ravaged indigenous populations, and laid the groundwork for centuries of colonial oppression and the transatlantic slave trade. The halo of history, Columbus, the visionary, the intrepid explorer, also bore the brutal face of a conqueror, a man driven by insatiable ambition, willing to sacrifice countless lives for his grand designs. Isabella, the devout queen, the patron of discovery, also sanctioned a venture that led directly to unspeakable atrocities, even if she recoiled from them later. Her gamble was not just an investment of state funds, it was an investment in a new world order, one built on the brutal subjugation of others. The legacy is complex, morally ambiguous, and undeniably profound. It is a stark reminder that even the most celebrated chapters of human history often carry a hidden ledger of unimaginable suffering. The age of exploration was epic. Yes, but it was also a crucible of human vice, a testament to the destructive power of greed, and a stark lesson in the unforeseen consequences of ambition unbound. So was it her greatest investment, or the bloodiest gamble? Perhaps it was both inextricably intertwined. The gamble paid off for Spain in terms of power and wealth, but the blood spilled, the civilizations shattered, the lives lost fey that was the true, enduring price of their audacious venture. The ghosts of those early voyages, the whispers of betrayal and madness, still echo through the annals of time, reminding us that history, like the ocean itself, holds depths we can only begin to comprehend. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.